The stethoscope felt heavier than usual around Dr. Isaac Levin's neck as he walked through the cobblestone streets of Kraków. October 1942 had painted the city in shades of amber and rust, but beneath the autumn beauty lurked shadows that grew longer each day. His leather medical bag swayed gently against his leg, carrying more than bandages and medicines. It held secrets that could cost him everything, but Isaac didn't know that yet. Dr. Levin had just finished his evening rounds at the small clinic on Soroka Street. During his visits that day, Mrs. Goldstein's arthritis had been worsening, and young David Rosenberg still wheezed from the chest infection that wouldn't seem to clear. These were normal concerns for a physician, yet nothing felt normal anymore. The yellow stars sewn onto coats had become as common as fallen leaves, and whispered conversations died abruptly whenever German uniforms appeared. His fingers unconsciously traced the outline of the hidden photograph in his coat pocket, Sarah's smiling face from their wedding day, 3 years ago, when the world still made sense. The image was forbidden now, like so many things that once brought joy. As Isaac turned onto Josepha Street, the sound of heavy boots on cobblestones made his heart skip. A German patrol was conducting random searches ahead, their flashlights cutting through the evening darkness like accusatory fingers. He could still turn back, take the longer route home, but that would look suspicious, wouldn't it? The soldier's eyes met his across the narrow street. Isaac forced himself to walk normally, his medical training helping him control his breathing, one foot, then the other. Don't look back, don't run. But his hand instinctively moved toward the photograph in his pocket, and in that split second of weakness, he realized his mistake. Halt papers. The command cracked through the air like a whip. Isaac stopped, his medical bag suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. The young SS officer approached with the casual confidence of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. Behind him, 2 more soldiers flanked the street, blocking any escape route. Guten Abend, Isaac said carefully, his German accent refined from his university days in Vienna. He reached slowly for his identification papers, praying his hands wouldn't shake. I am Dr. Isaac Levin. I was just returning from patient visits. The officer's pale blue eyes scanned the documents with the thoroughness of a man who enjoyed finding flaws. A Jewish doctor, he mused, the words carrying obvious disdain. Still practicing medicine. I see, yes sir. I serve the community as permitted by. Open the bag. The words hung in the air between them, like a death sentence. Isaac's mind raced through the contents. Morphine he shouldn't have, medical records with hidden notes about patients who had disappeared, and worst of all, the coded messages sewn into the lining that detailed Nazi activities in the ghetto. His fingers fumbled with the clasp, buying precious seconds. Around them, other pedestrians had melted into the shadows, unwilling to witness what might come next. The street lamp cast long shadows across the cobblestones, and Isaac noticed how his own shadow seemed to stretch toward the darkness, as if already being pulled away from the light. Hurry up, doctor. The soldier's impatience was growing, and Isaac knew that hesitation would be interpreted as guilt. He opened the bag with steady hands, revealing the innocent supplies on top: stethoscope, thermometer, gauze, a small bottle of aspirin. But the officer wasn't satisfied with a casual glance. Remove everything, place it on the ground. As Isaac began emptying his bag, item by item, he caught a glimpse of movement in an upstairs window across the street. Someone was watching. Mrs. Kowalski, the Polish woman who sometimes helped smuggle food into the ghetto. Her weathered face was pressed against the glass, eyes wide with fear. The morphine bottle clinked against the cobblestones. Interesting, the officer murmured, picking up the vial. Rather a large amount for routine house calls, wouldn't you say? Isaac's throat went dry, but he forced his voice to remain steady. Many patients are in severe pain, sir. The elderly, those with chronic conditions. The officer's smile was thin and cold. Yes, I'm sure they are suffering. He pocketed the morphine. What else are you hiding, doctor? That's when Isaac noticed the soldier's fingers moving toward the bag's lining, where the seam had been carefully restitched to conceal the documents within. His heart hammered against his ribs, so loudly he was certain everyone could hear it. In the window above, Mrs. Kowalski's hand moved to her throat in a gesture of silent prayer. The soldier's fingertip traced the edge of the hidden seam, and Isaac realized he was about to discover secrets that would doom not just him, but dozens of others in the resistance network. That's when the air raid siren began to wail across the city. The siren's haunting cry pierced the October night, and for a moment, even the SS officer's attention wavered. Isaac seized that split second of distraction, his medical instincts taking over as he quickly gathered his scattered supplies back into the bag. The soldier's hand had moved away from the dangerous seam, his head tilted toward the sky where the distant drone of aircraft could be heard. Air raid! Someone shouted from a nearby building. Windows began slamming shut, and the few remaining pedestrians hurried toward the nearest shelter. The officer looked torn between continuing his search and following protocol. But Isaac's relief was premature. You will come with us to the station, the officer decided, his pale eyes returning to Isaac with renewed suspicion. We will finish this conversation there. The medical bag felt like lead in Isaac's hands as they marched him through the increasingly empty streets. Each step took him further from safety, further from the small apartment where Sarah waited with their meager dinner growing cold. She would pace by the window when he didn't return, her dark eyes scanning the street for his familiar silhouette. But he didn't know what was really waiting for him there. As they walked past the old synagogue on Soroka Street, now boarded up and covered with Nazi propaganda, Isaac's mind drifted to the time when these same streets had been filled with the sounds of children playing and merchants haggling. He remembered his first day at the medical university in Vienna, how his father had gripped his shoulders and said, "You carry our hopes now, Isaac. Use your knowledge to heal the world." How naive they had all been, to think knowledge alone could protect them from this darkness. The police station loomed ahead, its windows glowing with harsh electric light. Isaac had walked past this building hundreds of times, but tonight it looked like the mouth of a beast waiting to swallow him whole. Other prisoners shuffled in the courtyard, some beaten, all defeated. A woman cradled a crying infant, rocking back and forth in a rhythm of desperation. Inside, the officer commanded. The interrogation room smelled of fear and disinfectant. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows that seemed to move and writhe on the walls. Isaac was forced into a wooden chair that had clearly seen too many prisoners before him. The armrests were worn smooth by countless desperate grips, but what haunted him most was the silence. During his medical training, Isaac had learned to read between the lines of what patients didn't say. The hesitation before describing symptoms, the way eyes avoided contact when discussing family history. Now he was the one being read, and he could feel the officer's gaze dissecting every nervous gesture, every bead of sweat. Dr. Isaac Levin, the officer began, consulting a file that was surprisingly thick. Born 1915 in Kraków, graduated from the University of Vienna Medical School, 1938. Married to Sarah Levin, formerly Sarah Goldberg, no children. The clinical recitation of his life felt like an autopsy being performed while he was still alive. How had they gathered so much information? Who had been watching, reporting, cataloguing their movements? You have been treating patients in the ghetto, the officer continued. It wasn't a question. Isaac chose his words carefully. I provide medical care to those who need it, as my oath requires. Your oath. The officer's laugh was sharp and humorless. Tell me, doctor, does your oath include smuggling medical supplies, falsifying death certificates, hiding those who should be on transport lists. Each accusation hit like a physical blow. Someone had indeed been watching, reporting on activities Isaac thought were secret. His mind raced through possibilities. Which patients could have betrayed him? Which neighbors had Nazi sympathies? At that moment, the door burst open. A younger soldier entered and whispered something in the officer's ear. Isaac caught only fragments, more urgent matter, and orders from Berlin. The officer's expression shifted from satisfied hunter to frustrated bureaucrat. "It seems you have been granted a temporary reprieve, doctor," he said, standing abruptly. "But do not mistake this for mercy. We will be watching you very closely now." As Isaac was escorted back onto the street, the all-clear signal was sounding across the city. The air raid had been brief, probably just reconnaissance planes, but it had saved his life, for tonight at least. But walking home through the familiar streets that now felt foreign and dangerous, Isaac realized that his old life was truly over. The white coat that had once marked him as a healer now made him a target. The medical bag that had carried hope now carried evidence of his doom. When he finally reached his apartment building, Sarah was indeed waiting by the window. Her face crumpled with relief when she saw him, but as they embraced, Isaac felt the weight of what he couldn't tell her. Tomorrow, everything would change. The train schedules had already been posted. The deportations were beginning, and Dr. Isaac Levin's name was on the list. The cattle car had no windows, only thin slats that allowed slivers of grey light to penetrate the suffocating darkness. Isaac pressed his back against the wooden wall, feeling the train's rhythmic clacking beneath him like a mechanical heartbeat, counting down to doom. 87 people crammed into a space meant for cattle, and the smell of fear was as overwhelming as the lack of air. But Isaac wasn't thinking about the conditions anymore. 3 days into their journey to Auschwitz, he had already begun his transformation from Dr. Isaac Levin, respected physician, to prisoner 174517. The number had been tattooed onto his left forearm with the casual efficiency of livestock branding, but somehow his medical instincts had survived the dehumanization process intact. An elderly man named Mordecai was dying in the corner. The other prisoners had given up on him. They had learned quickly that compassion was a luxury they couldn't afford. But Isaac couldn't ignore the rattling breath, the blue-tinged lips, the way the old man's eyes had begun to glaze over with the approach of death. Moving carefully through the press of bodies, Isaac knelt beside Mordecai. His medical bag was long gone, confiscated at the first checkpoint, but his hands still remembered how to diagnose, how to comfort, how to heal when healing was possible. Pneumonia, he whispered to himself, recognizing the telltale signs. Without antibiotics or proper care, the old man would be dead within hours. Isaac looked around desperately, searching for anything that might help, but found only hopeless faces staring back at him. That's when he noticed the young woman, watching him intently. She was perhaps 25, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the gloom of their mobile prison. Her hair had been roughly shorn, like all the women, but she carried herself with a dignity that the Nazis hadn't managed to strip away. "You're a doctor," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Isaac hesitated. Admitting his profession could make him valuable to the guards, or it could make him a target for prisoners who blamed educated Jews for their situation. Trust was dangerous in a world where survival often meant betraying others. "I was," he replied carefully. "My name is Rebecca. I was a nurse in Warsaw before." She gestured vaguely at their surroundings. "That man has maybe 2 hours left, but there's a child over there who might live if we can break his fever." Isaac followed her gaze to where a boy of perhaps 8 lay unconscious against his mother's chest. The woman's eyes were wild with grief and terror, rocking back and forth while whispering prayers in Yiddish. The child's forehead burned with fever, his small body convulsing with periodic shivers. But what could they do? Without medicine, without tools, without even clean water. Rebecca seemed to read his thoughts. There's a loose board near the floor. If we can pry it up, we might find some snow underneath from when the train stopped. And I have this. She carefully extracted a small piece of cloth from her sleeve, clean fabric that she had somehow managed to preserve. Isaac stared at her with something approaching amazement. In the midst of this hell, she had maintained, not just hope, but practical compassion. It was the first glimpse of humanity he had seen since the deportation began. Working together in the dim light, they managed to loosen the board enough to collect a handful of dirty snow. Rebecca filtered it through her precious cloth, while Isaac examined the boy more closely. High fever, rapid pulse, but responsive pupils. Dehydration was the immediate danger. "What's your name?" Isaac asked the terrified mother. "Anna Goldberg. This is my son David. Please, he's all I have left." The irony wasn't lost on Isaac. David, like the young patient he had treated in Kraków just days ago. How many Davids would die before this nightmare ended? Carefully, drop by drop, they managed to get some of the filtered water into the boy's mouth. It wasn't much, but it was something. Isaac showed Anna how to position her son to help him breathe more easily, how to recognize if his condition worsened. But he couldn't save Mordecai. The old man died, just as Rebecca had predicted, his final breath, lost in the train's mechanical rhythm. The other passengers barely noticed. Death was already becoming commonplace, background noise in their journey to hell. Isaac closed Mordecai's eyes with gentle fingers, whispering the Kaddish under his breath. It was a small act of defiance, maintaining Jewish tradition in the face of systematic destruction. As the train continued its relentless journey eastward, Isaac found himself thinking about the choice he had just made. He could have stayed silent. He could have stayed silent, anonymous, focused solely on his own survival. Instead, he had revealed himself as a healer, had taken responsibility for others' suffering. Rebecca settled beside him, as the car grew darker with approaching night. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what? I couldn't save him. You tried. That still matters, even here." Isaac looked around at the other prisoners, teachers, merchants, craftsmen, children, all reduced to numbers, all facing the same unknown fate. But Rebecca was right. Maintaining their humanity, their capacity for compassion, might be the only victory possible in a world designed to strip away their very souls. The train whistle shrieked in the distance, and Isaac realized they were slowing down. Their destination was approaching, but something told him their real journey was just beginning. The gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau opened like the jaws of a mechanical beast, swallowing the train whole. Isaac had heard whispers about this place during his final days in Kraków, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality. The infamous sign, albeit marked Frei, hung above them with cruel irony as guards with snarling dogs herded the new arrivals into formation. But it wasn't the brutality that shocked Isaac most. It was how efficiently the camp operated. Within hours, he found himself assigned to the camp infirmary, a decision that probably saved his life. His medical knowledge made him useful, and useful prisoners lived longer than the others. The hospital was little more than wooden barracks filled with makeshift beds, but it was where Isaac would spend his days trying to heal the unhealable. Dr. Mengele had personally reviewed his file, those cold eyes assessing Isaac like a specimen in a laboratory. "You will assist Dr. Worths with the sick prisoners," he had said in perfect German. "Remember, your job is to keep the workers functional, not to waste resources on the dying." The moral compromise was immediate and devastating. 3 weeks into his imprisonment, Isaac had learned to navigate the impossible choices that defined camp life. Save the prisoners who could return to work, let the others die quietly, report infectious diseases that could spread, but ignore the malnutrition that was slowly killing everyone. treat injuries that resulted from accidents, while pretending not to see the systematic violence that caused them. Today brought a new transport from the east, and with it, unexpected news. Isaac was cleaning wounds in the infirmary when he heard familiar voices speaking in hushed Polish. A group of new prisoners was being processed outside, and their conversation carried through the thin walls of the medical barracks. "The Soviets are pushing back near Stalingrad," one voice whispered urgently. "The German Sixth Army is trapped. It's only a matter of time." Isaac's hand stilled on the bandage he was wrapping. News from the front was precious currency in the camp. Hope measured in stolen radio reports and smuggled letters. If the Soviets were truly gaining ground, if the German war machine was showing cracks, but hope was dangerous in Auschwitz. "Dr. Levin," a voice called from behind him. Isaac turned to see Mordecai Anielewicz, not the old man who had died on the train, but a younger prisoner who worked in the camp's tailor shop. Despite the similarity in names, this Mordecai was very much alive, and Isaac had begun to suspect there was more to him than met the eye. "There's a problem in Block 14, Mordecai continued, his voice carefully neutral. "Several prisoners have developed severe dysentery. The block leader requests your immediate attention." Isaac gathered his meager medical supplies, but something in Mordecai's tone suggested this wasn't a routine medical emergency. As they walked through the camp's maze of barracks, Mordecai moved closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "The news from Stalingrad is true, but there's something else you need to know." Isaac's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to walk normally, to give no sign that anything unusual was happening. Guards watched everything, and paranoia was as common as hunger in the camp. "What kind of something?" "There are people organizing resistance activities. Documents are being smuggled out. Testimony is being recorded. Medical records could be particularly valuable." The implications hit Isaac like a physical blow. His detailed observations of camp conditions, his careful documentation of medical experiments, his records of systematic starvation, all of it could serve as evidence of Nazi war crimes. But possessing such documents would mean certain death if discovered. They had reached Block 14, where the medical emergency was real enough to provide cover for their conversation. Isaac began examining patients while Mordecai continued speaking in low tones. "There's a network, people who believe the world needs to know what's happening here. But it requires trust, and trust is dangerous." Isaac finished. He had been thinking the same thing for weeks, watching the daily horrors and feeling the physician's obligation to document, to witness, to preserve evidence of what he was seeing. As Isaac treated the sick prisoners, men whose bodies were slowly consuming themselves from malnutrition, he found himself making mental notes that went beyond simple medical observations. The systematic nature of the starvation, the calculated cruelty of the work assignments, the medical experiments that violated every principle of his profession. But documenting atrocities was one thing, actively resisting was another entirely. "What would be required?" he asked quietly, knowing he was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Mordecai's eyes glinted with something that might have been approval. "Patience, careful observation, and the courage to believe that someday someone will care about what happened here." Just then, the sound of boots approached outside the barracks. Both men fell silent as an SS guard entered, his presence immediately transforming the atmosphere from whispered conspiracy to medical routine. "How many are unfit for work?" the guard demanded. Isaac looked at the dozen sick prisoners before him, knowing his answer would determine who lived and who was selected for transport to the gas chambers. The medical assessment that should have been about healing had become a decision about who deserved to survive another day. "Most will recover with rest," Isaac lied smoothly. "Perhaps 3 should be excused from heavy labor for a few days." The guard nodded and left without further comment, but Isaac knew he had just made his first active choice in what Mordecai called resistance. 3 men would live a little longer because of his deception. As evening approached and they returned to their barracks, Mordecai made one final comment that would haunt Isaac through the long night ahead. "The documents we're collecting, they're going to survive this place even if we don't." The contact came 3 days later, in the most unlikely of places, the camp latrine. Isaac had learned that the most sensitive conversations happened in locations the guards found too unpleasant to monitor closely. The stench was overwhelming, but it provided a shield of privacy that was impossible to find anywhere else in Auschwitz. A prisoner Isaac had never seen before approached him during the morning work detail. The man was perhaps 40, with the hardened look of someone who had survived multiple camps. His prisoner number started with a lower digit, marking him as one of the earlier arrivals who had somehow managed to stay alive. "You're the doctor from Kraków," the man said, without preamble. It wasn't a question. Isaac nodded carefully, wondering how his reputation had spread through the camp's invisible communication network. Information traveled faster than disease in Auschwitz, often just as dangerous and just as difficult to contain. "My name is Stefan. I work in the Canada warehouse, sorting belongings from new transports." The significance wasn't lost on Isaac. The Canada detail had access to items confiscated from incoming prisoners, clothing, valuables, photographs, and sometimes documents. It was one of the few work assignments that offered opportunities for small acts of resistance. But what Stefan said next changed everything. "We've been saving medical supplies, small amounts, nothing that would be missed immediately. A few aspirin tablets here, some bandages there, occasionally something more valuable." Stefan's voice dropped even lower. "We need someone with medical knowledge to tell us what's worth risking our lives for." Isaac's mind raced through the implications. Hoarding medical supplies was a capital offense, but the opportunity to actually help prisoners, beyond the limited resources of the official infirmary, was overwhelming. How many lives could be saved with access to real medicine? "What kind of supplies?" he asked. Stefan glanced around nervously before reaching into his pocket. From a carefully concealed inner seam, he extracted a small glass vial. "Insulin," he whispered. "There's a diabetic prisoner in Block 22 who's been slowly dying. The camp doctors have written him off." Isaac's hands trembled as he examined the vial. Real insulin, enough for perhaps a week of treatment. In the outside world, it would be a routine medication. Here, it was literally the difference between life and death. "There's more," Stefan continued. "Antibiotics, morphine for pain relief, even some surgical instruments that were hidden in luggage. But we need someone who understands how to use these things properly." The weight of the decision pressed down on Isaac like a physical force. Accepting would mean joining an active resistance network, taking risks that could result in immediate execution. But refusing would mean watching prisoners die from treatable conditions while medicine sat hidden in a warehouse. "The diabetic prisoner," Isaac said quietly. "What's his name?" "Rabbi Goldstein. He was a scholar from Lublin before the war. Now he's just another dying number." Unless Isaac closed his eyes, thinking of his medical oath, his responsibility to preserve life. The Hippocratic principle seemed almost absurd in this place designed for systematic murder, but it was perhaps the only thing that still connected him to the man he used to be. "I'll need to examine him first." Diabetic coma in these conditions could be complicated by malnutrition, dehydration, any number of factors. Stefan's relief was visible. "Meet me tomorrow during evening roll call. Block 22, third bunk from the window." "But doctor," his voice carried a warning that chilled Isaac to the bone. "If you're discovered, you've never seen me before." The insulin vial felt like it was burning a hole in Isaac's pocket as he returned to his duties. He had just committed himself to something that could save lives, or destroy them all. "Tomorrow," He would make his choice between safety and resistance. The next 24 hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Isaac went through his routine duties in the infirmary, treating the cuts and bruises that the guards allowed him to address, while his mind churned with plans and contingencies. How could he examine a patient secretly? How could he administer insulin without arousing suspicion? When evening arrived, Isaac made his way to Block 22, with his heart hammering against his ribs. The barracks were overcrowded, as always, prisoners crammed into bunks designed for half their number. The smell of unwashed bodies, sickness, and despair was overwhelming. Rabbi Goldstein was exactly where Stefan had indicated, barely conscious and breathing in the shallow, rapid pattern that Isaac recognized as diabetic ketoacidosis. Without treatment, the man would be dead within days. But as Isaac knelt beside the bunk, pretending to comfort a dying prisoner, he heard footsteps approaching, heavy boots on the wooden floor, moving with the deliberate pace of someone conducting an inspection. SS Oberfuhrer Weber appeared at the end of the barracks, his cold eyes scanning the rows of prisoners. Isaac had encountered Weber before, a man who took personal pleasure in discovering infractions and dispensing punishments. His presence here, at this moment, couldn't be coincidental. Isaac forced himself to remain calm, continuing to whisper meaningless comfort to Rabbi Goldstein while Weber approached. The insulin vial felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket, and he was certain his guilt must be written across his face. "Dr. Levin," Weber said, his voice carrying across the silent barracks. "How fortunate to find you here. Tell me, what is your medical opinion of this prisoner's condition?" The question was a trap. Isaac realized. Weber knew about the diabetes, knew about the hidden medicine, knew about the resistance network. Someone had informed on them, and now Isaac faced an impossible choice. Tell the truth about Rabbi Goldstein's treatable condition, and reveal his knowledge of black market medical supplies. Lie about the diagnosis, and watch an innocent man die to protect the broader resistance network. Weber stepped closer, his boots stopping just inches from Isaac's kneeling form. "Well, doctor, I'm waiting for your professional assessment." Isaac met Weber's gaze steadily, making his decision. The prisoner appears to be suffering from severe malnutrition and dehydration, common symptoms in the later stages of camp life. Weber's thin smile suggested he wasn't convinced. "How interesting. And what would you prescribe for such a condition, doctor?" Before Isaac could answer, a commotion erupted outside the barracks. Shouts in German, the sound of running feet, and then the sharp crack of gunfire. Weber's head snapped toward the noise, his attention momentarily diverted from his interrogation. "Search the entire block." Weber barked to the guards who had appeared in the doorway. Someone reported medical contraband in this area. Isaac's blood turned to ice. They knew about the hidden supplies, but apparently not the specific location or the people involved. Yet, the search would be thorough, methodical, and deadly for anyone found with forbidden items. But he still had the insulin in his pocket. As guards began forcing prisoners from their bunks, Isaac made a desperate decision. While Weber was occupied with organizing the search, Isaac quickly slipped the small vial to Rabbi Goldstein, pressing it into the unconscious man's palm and closing his fingers around it. "Hide it," Isaac whispered urgently. "Under your body, in your clothes, anywhere." But Rabbi Goldstein was too far gone to understand. His eyes fluttered open briefly, confused and unfocused, before closing again. The insulin vial lay exposed in his limp hand. Isaac's mind raced through options. He could take the vial back, accept the risk of being caught with it himself. He could try to move it to another hiding place, or he could create a distraction. The decision was made for him when a young prisoner in the next bunk began having what appeared to be an epileptic seizure. The boy thrashed violently, foam appearing at the corners of his mouth. his body convulsing with terrifying intensity. Without thinking, Isaac moved to help, his medical training overriding all other considerations. But something felt wrong about the seizure. The boy's eyes, when they briefly opened, showed a clarity that didn't match the apparent medical emergency. As Isaac continued his examination, he felt the boy's hand brush against his. In that brief contact, something small and hard was pressed into Isaac's palm. The boy had somehow retrieved the insulin vial from Rabbi Goldstein and was passing it back to Isaac, but the transfer hadn't gone unnoticed. Weber's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "What exactly is happening here, Doctor?" The boy's seizure subsided just as Isaac pocketed the insulin vial, but the damage was already done. Weber's suspicions had crystallized into certainty, and the systematic search of Block 22 revealed what everyone feared most. Hidden beneath loose floorboards, the guards discovered a cache of medical supplies that could only have come from the Canada warehouse. 3 prisoners were immediately arrested, including Stefan. But Isaac's real education in resistance began 2 days later, when Mordecai approached him with an offer that would change everything. "There's something you need to see," Mordecai whispered during the evening meal distribution. "Tonight, after lights out, follow me to the latrines, but bring your medical knowledge. We're going to need it." The rendezvous led not to the latrines themselves, but to a loose section of floorboards beneath the sanitation building. Mordecai lifted the planks to reveal a narrow opening that dropped into darkness below. "Welcome to the real resistance," he said simply. The tunnel was a marvel of desperate engineering. Prisoners had been digging for months, moving earth grain by grain, shoring up walls with scavenged wood, creating an underground network that extended far beyond what Isaac had imagined possible. "This isn't just an escape route," Mordecai explained as they crawled through passages barely wide enough for a man's shoulders. "It's a lifeline for information. Documents, testimony, evidence of what's happening here." They emerged into a larger chamber where Isaac discovered the true scope of the operation. Anna Heilman sat hunched over carefully copied medical records, her administrative access allowing her to document transport numbers, execution orders, the bureaucratic machinery of genocide. "These papers will outlive this place," she said without looking up, "but only if we can get them beyond the wire." Isaac examined the documents by candlelight, his own medical observations mixed with detailed accounts of SS brutality, systematic starvation, the human experimentation that violated every principle of healing. It was a complete record of Nazi war crimes, meticulously documented and preserved. "The tunnel extends 200 meters beyond the outer perimeter," Mordecai continued, "but the digging is taking a toll on the workers. Lung problems from poor air circulation, injuries from cave-ins, infections that could kill them before the project is complete." Isaac understood his role immediately. "You need a doctor who can keep the diggers alive long enough to finish." "Exactly. But there's something else." Anna handed him a document that made his blood freeze. "Weber has been compiling a list of prisoners with medical training. Your name isn't just on it. You're marked for special attention." The SS memorandum was terrifyingly specific. Weber suspected the medical staff of unauthorized activities and planned a comprehensive investigation that would expose every aspect of their resistance network. "How long do we have?" Isaac asked. "Days, maybe less," Mordecai replied. "Weber's planning a major inspection of all medical facilities. When that happens, this tunnel becomes our only way out." Isaac looked around the underground chamber, at the faces illuminated by flickering candlelight, at the precious documents that represented their only hope for justice. These people had risked everything to preserve evidence of Nazi crimes, and now their survival depended on completing an impossible escape route. "What do you need me to do?" "Keep the diggers healthy enough to work, treat their injuries without drawing attention, and prepare yourself for the possibility that we might have to use this tunnel sooner than planned." As they prepared to return to the surface, Anna pressed a waterproof packet into Isaac's hands. "Your medical records, the most detailed documentation we have of camp conditions. If something happens to us, these documents have to survive." Isaac felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. He was no longer just treating individual patients. He was helping to preserve evidence that could someday convict war criminals and ensure the world would never forget what happened in places like Auschwitz. But first, they had to survive long enough to deliver their testimony. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, a lifeline carved from desperation and hope. The tunnel work progressed with agonizing slowness over the next week. Isaac found himself living a double life, treating patients in the official infirmary by day, then slipping underground at night to care for the diggers whose lungs were slowly filling with dirt and whose hands bled from clawing through frozen earth. But something was wrong with the operation. Guards had begun appearing at unexpected times, asking pointed questions about prisoner movements, conducting random searches that seemed too precisely timed to be coincidental. Someone was feeding information to the SS, and the resistance network was being systematically compromised. The revelation came on a cold Thursday evening, when Isaac arrived at the tunnel entrance to find Stefan waiting for him. The Canada worker had been released from solitary confinement, apparently cleared of any serious wrongdoing, which should have been impossible, given what the guards had discovered. "They let me go," Stefan said. His voice hollow with exhaustion, said there wasn't enough evidence to prove I was involved in the medical supply theft. Isaac studied his face in the dim light, noting the fresh bruises that spoke of interrogation techniques, but also something else. A nervousness that hadn't been there before, a way of avoiding direct eye contact that set off every alarm in Isaac's medical training. "What did you tell them?" Isaac asked carefully. "Nothing. I swear on my mother's grave. They beat me for 3 days, but I said nothing about the resistance, nothing about the tunnel, nothing about you." But as Stefan spoke, Isaac noticed Mordecai emerging from the tunnel entrance behind them, his face grim with news that would shatter everything they had built. "We found listening devices," Mordecai announced quietly, "hidden in the main chamber, sophisticated equipment that could only have been placed by someone with intimate knowledge of our operations." The implications hit Isaac like a physical blow. Their entire network had been compromised, every conversation recorded, every plan exposed to SS surveillance. But the worst revelation was yet to come. "There's more," Mordecai continued, his eyes fixed on Stefan with unmistakable accusation. "Anna found records in the administrative files. Stefan's release wasn't because of insufficient evidence, it was because he agreed to cooperate." Stefan's face went pale, but he tried to maintain his innocence. "That's impossible. I would never." "The listening devices were placed exactly where you suggested we hold our planning meetings," Mordecai pressed. "The guard searches happened precisely when you said the tunnel would be unoccupied. And Weber's investigation is focusing on exactly the people you've had contact with." Isaac felt the ground shifting beneath his feet as the pattern became clear. Stefan's survival, his access to medical supplies, his knowledge of resistance activities, all of it had been orchestrated by the SS to infiltrate and destroy their network from within. "How long?" Isaac asked, his voice barely a whisper. Stefan's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Since the beginning. They approached me before I was even assigned to Canada, said my family in the Lodz ghetto would be protected if I cooperated, that they would die if I refused." The confession hung in the air like poison. Everything they had worked for, every document preserved, every life saved through hidden medical supplies, all of it had been performed under SS observation. "Weber knows about the tunnel," Stefan continued, tears streaming down his face. "He knows about the documents, about Isaac's medical records, about Anna's administrative access. The only reason he hasn't acted yet is because he wants to catch everyone involved. Mordecai's hand moved to the knife concealed in his clothing, but Isaac stopped him with a gesture. Killing Stefan wouldn't change what had already been revealed, and it would only add another death to the countless tragedies of this place. How much time do we have? Isaac asked. Hours, maybe less, Stefan replied. Weber's planning a final raid tonight. He wants to capture the resistance leadership and seize all the documents as evidence of conspiracy against the Reich. Isaac looked around at the faces of people who had trusted him, who had risked everything to preserve evidence of Nazi crimes, who now face certain death because of one man's impossible choice between family and principle. The tunnel that had represented hope now felt like a tomb, and their carefully preserved testimony seemed destined to die with them in the darkness below Auschwitz. But Isaac wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. The sound of boots marching in formation echoed across the camp as Weber's forces prepared for their final assault on the resistance network. Isaac crouched in the tunnel's main chamber, surrounded by the evidence that had cost so many lives to preserve, knowing that within hours it would all be destroyed, along with everyone who had helped create it. But then, something unexpected happened. The distant rumble of artillery fire rolled across the Polish countryside like approaching thunder. Allied forces were closer than anyone had dared to hope, and the systematic destruction of Auschwitz was about to become a race against time. Soviet advance units are less than 20 kilometers away, Anna whispered, having somehow acquired intelligence from the camp's administrative communications. The SS is beginning evacuation procedures, but they're planning to eliminate all evidence before they leave. Isaac understood the implications immediately. Weber's raid wasn't just about capturing resistance members, it was about silencing witnesses who could testify to war crimes. The documents they had preserved were valuable, but their personal testimony was irreplaceable. We have to reach the tunnel exit now, Mordecai said, gathering the most critical papers into waterproof containers, before Weber realizes we know about his plans. But as they prepared to flee through their carefully constructed escape route, the sound of explosions grew closer. Allied bombing runs were targeting the camp's infrastructure, and the tunnel system was beginning to collapse under the impact of nearby strikes. The main passage is blocked, reported one of the diggers who had attempted to reach the forest exit. A direct hit brought down 30 meters of ceiling. We'd need days to clear it. Isaac felt the walls of their underground sanctuary pressing in around them, literally and figuratively. They were trapped between Weber's approaching raid and the Allied bombardment that represented salvation, if they could survive long enough to reach it. That's when Stefan made his final choice. There's another way out, he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had decided to seek redemption through sacrifice. Weber showed me the drainage system that connects to the old sewage treatment facility. It's narrow, dangerous, but it leads beyond the outer perimeter. Mordecai's eyes blazed with fury. Why should we trust anything you say? You've betrayed everything we've worked for. Because my family is already dead, Stefan replied, his voice breaking. Weber lied to me from the beginning. The Lodz ghetto was liquidated 3 months ago, while I was busy destroying the people who showed me kindness. The confession stripped away the last pretense between them. Stefan had lost everything, including his soul, for promises that were never meant to be kept. But his knowledge of the camp's hidden infrastructure might still save lives. The drainage tunnel is here, Stefan continued, pointing to a section of the chamber wall, but it floods during heavy rain, and with the bombing, the water pressure could be deadly. Isaac looked around at the faces of people who had become more than fellow prisoners. They had become family in the way that only shared suffering could create. Anna with her administrative records, Mordecai with his organizational genius, the unnamed diggers who had risked suffocation to carve hope from solid earth. The documents go with Anna and Mordecai, Isaac decided. They're young, strong. They have the best chance of survival. I'll stay behind to delay Weber's search, give you more time to escape. That's suicide, Anna protested. Weber will torture you for information about everyone who helped. Isaac smiled sadly, thinking of his medical oath, his responsibility to preserve life even at the cost of his own. I'm a doctor. My job is to heal, and sometimes that means knowing when to let go. As Allied artillery continued to rain down on the camp, Isaac helped his friends prepare for an escape attempt that would either deliver crucial evidence to the outside world or end in drowning beneath the barracks of Auschwitz. The sound of Weber's boots was getting closer, but so was the sound of freedom. The drainage tunnel was exactly as nightmarish as Stefan had warned. Isaac crawled through passages filled with freezing water that rose to his chest, his lungs burning from the effort of breathing in the confined space. Behind him, the sound of Weber's discovery echoed through the collapsed tunnel system, shouts of rage, as the SS officer realized his carefully planned trap had failed. But Anna and Mordecai had escaped with the documents, carrying with them the evidence that would someday ensure justice for the victims of Auschwitz. Isaac emerged from the drainage system into the Polish forest just as Soviet artillery began its final bombardment of the camp. The systematic machinery of death that had consumed hundreds of thousands of lives was finally being dismantled piece by piece by the advancing forces of liberation. He spent 3 days hiding in the woods, watching as German forces fled westward before Soviet soldiers found him collapsed beside a frozen stream, more dead than alive, but still clutching a small leather portfolio that contained his personal medical records. The liberation of Auschwitz revealed horrors that exceeded even Isaac's detailed documentation. Allied investigators discovered gas chambers disguised as shower rooms, warehouses filled with human hair and belongings, mass graves that testified to industrial-scale murder. The evidence Isaac had helped preserve was confirmed by physical reality, but the human testimony remained invaluable. Weber was captured during the Soviet advance, along with other SS personnel who had been too slow to escape the collapsing Reich. The documents that Anna and Mordecai had smuggled out of the camp became crucial evidence in the war crimes trials that followed. 6 months later, Isaac sat in a courtroom in Nuremberg, holding the same leather portfolio he had carried from the forest. His medical records, combined with the broader documentation preserved by the resistance network, painted a picture of systematic genocide that the world could no longer ignore. When called to testify, Isaac spoke not just for himself, but for Rabbi Goldstein, who had died without insulin, for the children subjected to medical experiments, for every prisoner who had trusted him with their suffering, and for the resistance fighters who had given their lives to preserve the truth. Weber sat among the defendants, his arrogant demeanor replaced by the desperate defiance of a man facing justice for crimes against humanity. When their eyes met across the courtroom, Isaac felt no satisfaction, only the quiet certainty that truth had finally found its voice. Dr. Levin, the prosecutor asked, in your professional opinion, what was the primary purpose of the medical facilities at Auschwitz-Birkenau? Isaac looked at the assembled judges, reporters, and observers who represented a world trying to understand how civilization had collapsed so completely. The medical facilities were not designed to heal, he replied slowly. They were designed to facilitate murder while maintaining the pretense of scientific legitimacy. The truth, preserved at such terrible cost, was finally being heard. After the trials, Isaac emigrated to America, where he spent the rest of his life working with Holocaust survivors and documenting testimonies for future generations. Anna became a respected historian, ensuring that the resistance story was never forgotten. Mordecai settled in Israel, carrying the memory of those who didn't survive. But Isaac's most important work was yet to come. He established medical scholarship programs for young doctors, teaching them that the healing profession carried responsibilities that extended far beyond individual patients. The oath to first do no harm meant standing against systematic evil, even when the cost was enormous. Rebecca, the nurse who had betrayed them, was never seen again after the camp's liberation. Stefan died during the final bombing, his last act an attempt to guide other prisoners to safety through the drainage tunnels he had revealed. On quiet evenings in his later years, Isaac would sit by his window and remember the faces of those who had trusted him with their lives in the darkest place on earth. The weight of survival, of bearing witness, never left him, but neither did the knowledge that their sacrifice had meaning. The truth about Auschwitz, about the medical experiments, about the systematic destruction of human dignity, lived on in courtrooms and classrooms, in museums and memorials, in the testimonies of those who refused to let evil triumph through silence. Dr. Isaac Levin had learned that sometimes the greatest healing required the ultimate sacrifice, and that the most important medicine was memory itself. If this story of courage and resistance moved you, if you believe these testimonies must never be forgotten, please subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from history's darkest and most inspiring moments. Hit the bell icon to be notified when we share new stories of survival, resistance, and the unbreakable human spirit. Your support helps us continue preserving these vital historical testimonies for future generations.